Welcome to the Explainer. It happens time and time again in boardrooms and crisis centers all over the world. A major disruption hits, and organizations completely misidentify their critical priorities. Today, we're going to explore exactly why that happens. We're going to shift our mindset away from a traditional technology-first approach and move toward a much more robust, value-first approach to operational resilience.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We'll start by redefining what is truly critical, compare applications to business value, and examine the crisis as a revealer. Then, we'll dive into the ransom-kick approach, walk through a real-world tale of two applications, and wrap up with how to achieve coherent operational resilience.
So let's jump right into Section 1. What is truly critical? The illusion of preparedness. We really need to examine the very foundation of business continuity plans and that one big assumption that usually kicks off the entire recovery process. Whenever a crisis occurs, this single, profound question inevitably drops right into the middle of the decision room. The pressure is on, the clock is ticking, and honestly, the answer, at least to the people sitting in that room, often seems completely obvious. Ask that question, and most organizations will immediately point to their tech stack. They'll start listing off servers, applications, databases, infrastructure, and why wouldn't they? They know their IT systems incredibly well. Yet, despite this rapid response, they regularly discover right in the middle of a crisis that their real operational priorities were actually somewhere else entirely. They understand their IT for sure, but they often understand far less about the actual mechanisms that create business value. Moving to Section 2, Applications versus Business Value, Shifting the Focus. Let's look at why focusing solely on technology systems fundamentally limits an organization's overall resilience. This contrast is absolutely crucial. When building continuity plans, most folks begin by identifying critical applications because, well, those apps support business activities. But assuming the application itself is the priority, that's a massive mistake. An application is just a means to an end. The real focus, that value-first approach you see over on the right, must be on the activities, the decisions, and the business transformations that actually create value. So instead of asking what application we need to restore first, executives need to hit pause and ask a totally different set of questions. Which vital decision must remain possible? Which business transformation must still take place? Ultimately, what value is the organization actually trying to preserve? It might sound like a subtle distinction, but trust me, it fundamentally changes the way operational resilience is understood and governed. Section 3, the crisis as revealer, shattering the illusion. So how do we usually figure out that we've been asking the wrong questions all along? Well, unfortunately, it usually takes a crisis. Let's think about the environment right before a disruption. On paper, everything looks perfectly coherent. This is what we call the illusion of preparedness. Critical systems are identified, disaster recovery binders are sitting on shelves, procedures are meticulously documented. Everyone feels pretty secure because all the boxes are checked. But then, the crisis actually arrives. Suddenly, incredibly tough decisions have to be made because you literally can't restore everything at once, and teams are forced to prioritize. That is when a much, much harder question emerges. Among everything that's currently offline, what is actually preventing us from creating value? In this way, the crisis acts as a harsh, undeniable revealer of truth. Which leads us to the core question. What does the crisis reveal that the organization could not previously see? It exposes invisible dependencies. It highlights forgotten validations that are suddenly blocking major operational flows. It uncovers true priorities that were never properly identified in those massive continuity binders. The crisis reveals the actual bottlenecks in value creation. Bringing us to Section 4, the ransom-kick approach, a new paradigm. This is the core methodology that actually solves this dangerous misalignment between IT recovery and business reality. The Ransom-Kick Resilience Model tackles this complex operational challenge through one simple, non-negotiable principle. Resilience must begin with value, not with technology. If we don't start with the value, any technical recovery we attempt is just expensive guesswork. To truly understand and map this out, the model walks organizations through 5 critical steps. First, you identify your core business objects. Second, map the transformations that allow those objects to evolve. Third, define the critical validations that enable their progression. Fourth, understand the business flows that connect them. And finally, discover the invisible dependencies that make the whole operation possible. Let's make this super practical with a real-world example. Take a standard customer order.
That order doesn't create value just by sitting idly in a database. It only creates value when it can be validated, prepared, delivered, and invoiced. The priority during a disruption isn't necessarily the application containing the order. The true priority is the organization's ability to continue the business transformation through these specific, vital operational steps.
Section 5. A Tale of Two Applications. The Practical Reality. Let's ground this theory in a concrete boardroom scenario to see how this actually plays out during a major incident. Consider the stark contrast between our assumptions and the operational reality. Imagine two applications. Application 1 is labeled critical, and great news, it's restored quickly. Application 2 is deemed secondary and remains completely unavailable. On paper, the IT recovery looks like a massive success, but in reality, operations remain completely blocked. Why? Because that secondary application 2 contained a forgotten mandatory validation that was required for a core business transformation. The system was restored, but the business was still stopped. The organization correctly identified an important piece of technology, but they completely failed to identify the real operational dependency. This is exactly why some organizations bounce back quickly, while others remain entirely paralyzed despite a technically flawless IT recovery. They just didn't understand their true value chain. Section 6. Achieving coherent operational resilience. The path forward. So how do we scale this level of understanding across a complex, ever-changing enterprise? Look, the more complex an organization becomes, the harder these dependencies are to track. Applications evolve, teams change, processes transform daily. The real operational challenge isn't just documenting your IT environment in some static spreadsheet anymore. The real challenge is preserving a coherent understanding of what actually creates value so that your leaders can make fast, accurate decisions under extreme pressure. This is exactly why tools like Archionis.app exist. Now, it's really important to note that this is designed strictly as a structuring and methodological environment to map these exact dependencies and create coherence. It is absolutely not some magical AI replacement for expert human governance. It's a visualization environment that empowers experienced resilience practitioners and executives to see the actual operational truth of their business. Thank you so much for exploring this reflection with me today. You can continue building your understanding of the Ransom-Kick Resilience Model, operational coherence, and the journey toward true anti-fragility by visiting the educational resources you see here. They're excellent next steps for any executive looking to elevate their organization's governance and decision-making. I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to take back to your own boardroom. When your next crisis arrives, and trust me, it will your teams be blindly restoring systems, or will you be strategically preserving value? Thank you for watching this explainer, and I'll see you next time for another look at real operational resilience.